Hello and welcome back to NCSY Pulse. We are powered by NCSY Alumni. And for today's show, I really should say we are powered by my guest today, Rabbi Micah Greenland, the National Director of NCSY. Rabbi Greenland, thank you so much for joining us and happy Hanukkah.
A pleasure to be here. Appreciate you having me on, and happy Hanukkah to you and to all the listeners.
This is really a fun opportunity for me. The last time you and I had a conversation about this, we discovered that we've known each other now for probably getting close to 30 years, which is probably way too much for both of us.
An intimidating number, yeah.
It is an intimidating number, and I like to think that this has really been a long time coming. Rabbi Greenland was actually my advisor on a very early NCSY Shabbaton I attended in high school, and it really is a special honor for me to be sitting here speaking with you today after all this time, that you've been such an incredible mentor and guide for almost my entire career. So thank you for everything, and I'm excited now.
Likewise, your accomplishments have been incredible, and it is a measure of nachas. The longer I've known somebody to see their accomplishment. So really, excited for this conversation, and appreciate. Hopefully, we'll still be doing interviews like this in another 30 years.
Amen. Absolutely. Okay, let's go back to the very beginning. You obviously have a very storied history with NCSY, not just professionally, but also your beginnings. Why don't you go back to the beginning? Tell us your origin story with NCSY.
It's fantastic. I grew up in Rochester, New York, and the NCSY chapter was more housed in shuls in those years, and the host shul for NCSY in Rochester was Congregation Beth Shalom, and there were every week junior NCSY meetings, they were called, in the basement of the shul, and junior NCSY meetings were open to third grade and up. It happened to be that the chapter advisor was the chazan of the shul, Chazan Gartenhouse, and he was also my second grade teacher. So he offered a special opportunity for the second graders. You could come to junior NCSY meetings too if you want. So I didn't know what meetings were, and I've had many tens of thousands of meetings probably since then, and they don't really resemble what those meetings were. Those meetings were basically potato chips and pretzels and video games and Nerf football in the basement of Congregation Beth Shalom. Okay, this is a lot of fun. So I didn't realize the spiritual component of NCSY or the sense of community that it could create until several years later. For me, it was purely just social and fun at the outset. But junior NCSY Shabbaton started in fifth grade, and it blew my mind. It was the first Shabbatons that I went to. It was like the whole idea of advisors who were relatable role models. I always loved Judaism, even if our family was not completely observant. We were somewhat observant, and it was the Shabbatons that really introduced me to this idea that Judaism could take on a whole additional degree of meaning, magnitude, significance, importance. And I guess the rest is history. I continued through my high school years, my college years as an advisor, but that's my origin story. I started as a kid in upstate New York, and I would say I've never left since. That's not entirely true. I took a brief hiatus for a year and a half when I was immediately post high school, and then another year-long hiatus when I first started my professional career. But aside from that, it's been a pretty solid run, almost uninterrupted since second grade. So that's literally like 40 years ago. So pretty wild.
That is incredible. I mean, you must have seen so many different iterations. Like you said, a meeting in junior NCSY, probably not the exact same thing as a strategy meeting with the executive team at NCSY or the OU planning the next bunch of years. Probably not the same. Maybe the same chips and pretzels, but probably not the same Nerf guns, I would assume.
That's exactly right. Yeah. Although, maybe Nerf guns would enhance and chips and pretzels would enhance too. But
yeah.
those are some of the early lessons that it's not necessarily a stale lesson. To incorporate some of those things would enhance meetings even today.
No pun intended on the stale lesson. You can't have
exactly.
Exactly. You have this long record within NCSY, and you talked about how you start off in juniors and then high school, and even though there were a couple breaks in between, but really this fairly consistent trajectory over the past almost 40 years. You've often spoken about the chipazon moment in NCSY, that aha moment where things click, where maybe it's a turning point. Was there a moment that you had where you were probably early on in your NCSY career, and maybe it was your high school years, maybe it was your advisor years, where you really felt things were starting to click and you were looking at this as not just a weekly meeting in the basement of your shul shooting each other with Nerf guns, but this might be the beginning of something else, something greater. Was there a moment that you can pinpoint where that was this aha moment?
So I definitely think that there were several, and they each were catalysts for different sorts of things. So there were the catalysts for my own growth, and definitely there were moments. They were more about even those chipazon moments were not the way we traditionally, or the way I traditionally think of chipazon moments. They were more one-on-one conversations or relational in nature instead of experience in nature. There was the regional board president who we wrote letters in those years. Who wrote me a letter as a ninth grader encouraging me to run for a regional board position as a teen in 10th grade. And that was a moment for me. Again, it wasn't a chipazon moment in the sense of like a big wow Havdalah, but it was more the moment of, wow, a person I respect as a current leader is looking at me as a potential leader. That was really meaningful. There were also a couple of times when I was learning Torah with an advisor and felt like this is new and exciting for me in a way that on the one hand opened my eyes up to the ocean of what Torah learning could be, but also said, wow, an NCSY advisor could be the person who introduces a teen to the entire universe of Torah in a new and dramatic way. There were a couple of times in my high school years that was like, wow, maybe that could be me. Maybe that they did it for me. Maybe I could do it for others to be that catalyst, that person making the intro. So one story in particular that I remember being pivotal was when I was in 12th grade. I was national president of NCSY and lived in Chicago at that point. I had moved from Rochester to Chicago between 9th and 10th grade. And the Chicago Winter Regional Convention was called Conclave. And a couple months before Conclave, Rabbi Binyamin Siegel, who was then the Skokie chapter advisor and responsible for writing the educational curriculum for the Shabbatons, came up to me and said, "You're going to write the curriculum for the Winter Regional Shabbaton."
Wow!
And I was again, I was in 12th grade. I thought, like, he's a rabbi, he's an educator. It makes sense that he can do this, but
sure,
I didn't really think that I had it in me. But again, the confidence of somebody else saying, "No, you do have this in you, and I'll work with you on it. I'm not going to leave you, hang you out to dry." But it was really a monumental experience for me too. I ended up, writing the session materials, writing the skit that I thought would tie in with the session materials, assigning the advisors their groups. I was the one standing on a chair with the advisor saying, "Okay, this is what you're going to do now. This is what you're going to do now," and all because it was empowered by Binyamin Siegel, by an advisor who himself said, "This is what I think kids are capable of if we give them the opportunity." And to me, that was also a piece of the recognition that educators can play really meaningful roles in terms of unlocking the opportunities that are in front of teenagers that the teenagers may not see or recognize on their own, but that advisors, NCSY staff people can help them appreciate and recognize.
It's an incredible story. And you're talking about something that I think is unique and really special that NCSY does, which is it's in our tagline. We talk about it. We empower Jewish teens. And it's interesting because you're in a unique position that you've been in NCSY for all these years. And that moment that you're talking about where truly an advisor empowered you to do something is maybe the pivotal moment that you're now using to describe, what kind of springboarded you to this career. NCSY has evolved over these years, and we've changed and we've grown in so many different ways. One of the amazing changes, I think, that's happened that may have a little bit of a, I don't want to say not God forbid, a negative side to it, but we've increased our staff so much over the past, 15 years, 20 years, where there are more NCSY staff members than there've ever been. There are more city directors and professionals than there have ever been. And I just wonder, can that take away from the ability sometimes to empower a teen?
I think it is a negative side. I for sure, I agree with that premise that there's a little bit of a push and pull. We've needed to professionalize as an organization. There are a lot of reasons why the things that were considered reasonable and effective in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s are not acceptable today, and many of them for good reason. We needed to professionalize it as an organization. We need to professionalize our screening of staff, our training of staff, the degree to which we rely on staff instead of simply relying on volunteers or teens. We have to do our very best not to make sure that the pendulum swings all the way the other direction, because we are at our core a teen youth movement, a movement that is about the inspiration of teens and the empowerment of teens so that they can take ownership of their own Jewish journey. And that requires a degree of, yes, with all the professionalism and the paid staff that, thank God, has grown by leaps and bounds over the last few decades, but it also needs to be accompanied by those same staff people recognizing that they need to find those opportunities to empower teens, to let go a little bit themselves and let the teens take the ball and run with it.
Absolutely. And it's tough. It's tough because these professionals do go through all the training, and they are excited to jump in and build programs and run Shabbatons, and it's a passion. And so you're right. There's a delicate balance in finding where do you let go to give the teen this opportunity where they could be the next Rabbi Greenland, and where do you say, but I'm, for the greater good, I have to be doing my very best. It's a tough balance to strike. But also, you touched on the relationship side of NCSY, that relationships have always been core to what we do here, healthy relationships. And like you said, again, with Rabbi Siegel and with your advisor writing you that letter, and the inspiration, the excitement that you got that somebody, a leader, was thinking of you. How do you look at this rich tradition that we have of relationships, and even expanding out of that, the programs that we run, the traditions of NCSY? How do you balance the concept of staying true to our traditions, but also, and by our traditions, I mean the traditions of NCSY, but also embracing innovation and embracing the need to adapt and grow and change with the times?
Great. So, I actually think in most cases it's not that hard. And that's because fundamentally, while the mechanisms to introduce oneself to a teen, the mechanisms to communicate with a teen may evolve and change, but fundamentally, the neshama of a teen is the same neshama, and that neshama is looking for connection and meaning. And that's what NCSY has been very consistent in providing throughout all the decades of our existence. That it's about the connection and the meaning that we can provide, and the things that provide connection and meaning are timeless. They really are feeling like somebody understands me. That Shabbos and Torah learning and a connection to Israel are things that those are not going to come and go with the times. Those are things that are going to make a difference in a teen's life, no matter what. So I think the opportunity and the obligation to innovate is really shows up in terms of how do we get teens in the door. In most cases, it's not by saying, "Hey, who's looking for meaning and connection in their life?" What actually gets kids to stay is because they're feeling that connection and they're feeling that meaning. And I do think we have an opportunity and an obligation to be innovative now, where teens are mostly on their devices during their free time, more today than ever before. And that device is connected to the whole world. And so what are the ways that we can use that device to develop entertaining but educational content that will be a hook? And I don't think it's something we've mastered. It's something we're experimenting with and at the early stages of experimenting with, but something that I think will very much be in the next frontier of how we reach and connect with teens.
Absolutely. It's fair to say you've had a long and storied tenure as national director with many, we've seen many ups and downs in the Jewish community and in the world since you began. But is there something that you could look back on, a proud moment of, it could be personal accomplishment, it could be organizational accomplishment, but something that you look at in your tenure as national director that you can look back and say, that was if not my proudest moment, that's a moment that, one day when I retire or walk away from this, get on to the next adventure, that's going to be a moment that I look back on and say, like, that might have been the moment at NCSY for me.
So oddly enough, I don't think it's one moment. I have some great stories, and I'm happy to tell some stories. But I think that it really is, what I'm proudest of is not a moment, but it's more of an approach. And the approach I'm proud of is an approach that values the contributions of each individual, that tries to relationship build and value each employee, each NCSYer, each advisor. As much as I can, I try to give the time of day to each of those and alumni to demonstrate through listening and patience and understanding and the unique contributions of each person, balancing that with an ambitious vision and pushing for growth. So I'm proudest of being able to, I think, walk that balance beam between not just being a growth driver, but also embracing the individuals, and not just embracing the individuals, but also being a growth driver. So that I am very proud. NCSY's number of teens reached has more than doubled. That our number of teens impacted by measures of frequency of engagement has more than doubled. Our number of teens on summer has nearly quadrupled. Our number of public school and community school graduates to yeshiva and seminary in Israel has more than doubled. Our fundraising that sustains all of those things and drives all of those things has needed to actually more than triple, because not all of our funding comes from fundraising. But the greatest driver of future growth has and will continue to need to come from fundraising. So that means that in order to double, triple, quadruple in all these measures, we've needed to more than double, triple, quadruple in fundraising. So that's what I'm most proud of. I try to check myself on all the time. Are we still staying true to that? Am I still staying true to that? Am I still machshiv, treating with importance the individual, while also not losing sight of the world needs big things from NCSY, and
Right.
if I ever lose sight of the big things that the world needs from us, and settle in and say, actually, we're okay now, impactful enough, we don't need more than what we have right now. We're gonna let the world down. We're gonna let God down in a certain sense. We're gonna let our current constituents down. We're gonna let our future constituents, who don't even know that they're future constituents, but if they miss the opportunity because we didn't dream big enough, then we'll let them down too. So I feel like that's the balance that I need to constantly remind myself of. And I know I fail. I know that sometimes I'm not ambitious enough, and I know sometimes I don't treat with importance the individual enough. And those are moments that I beat myself up about. But as a general, I would say ethos, that's what I'm proud of, is doing my very best to balance those two competing dynamics.
That's very well said, and it really has resonated through the organization. I can certainly personally attest to that. But also, as you mentioned, there have been times of failure. Failure sometimes is really looked at in too much of a negative way. We fail all the time. I certainly fail all the time, probably many times today already. But that's part of life, and that's part of work, and that's part of how we grow as individuals. Our colleague, Dr. Eliezer Jones, and I often talk about failure and how sometimes you can just really swap out the word failure with learning. And instead of saying I failed, you can say I learned, because through failure, we often learn. Is there a time that you can point out an experience that maybe you had a plan and the plan didn't quite go according to plan, as they sometimes do, but you came out of it saying, aha, I learned something, I've gained something, now I know for the future?
Yeah, I think that some of my biggest failures are failure to follow through on what I should have known was important to an individual. Either because they explicitly told me, or because it wasn't that hard to figure it out, and I still failed to follow through. So I'm thinking in particular of one donor. When I was Midwest Regional Director, we came in and, thank God, inherited a number of major donors that had been built by the previous leadership. But there was the first donor that we grew from giving nothing to the organization at all to an $18,000 donor. Was somebody that I remember very clearly letting him down. And we let him down in a couple of ways. One is that he wanted to get his wife involved, and she had a particular area of expertise that she was volunteering to help us out with. And she met with us and offered her expertise, and I didn't necessarily see an immediate need, so we dropped it. I didn't follow up with her. I didn't sufficiently thank her. I didn't spend time thinking about, okay, there's no immediate need, but maybe in 3 months, in 6 months, there might be a need, and can we set this up for the future? That let him down, and that wasn't the end of his giving, though, yet. He was frustrated by that, but the end of his giving was when we were doing a Shabbaton in the neighborhood and asked him and his wife to host. And they agreed to host a certain number of kids. And at the last minute, there were some cancellations, and the kids who were supposed to come to his house didn't end up showing up. And we did not contact them before Shabbos to say, sorry, we had some cancellations, these kids are not coming. Or maybe even we should have taken a different group and said, we have a very large group in one house. Let's actually split that into two and send some of them to this other house. Instead, we sent them nobody, and we failed to communicate with them that we were sending them nobody. And he was angry, and he saw me in shul that Shabbos and said, I think I'm done giving money to NCSY, because as much as I believe in your mission, and I was naively thinking that belief in the mission was enough to sustain a donor commitment, but it's not in most cases. Belief in the mission is a core component, but it needs to be matched with follow through on your commitments, take people seriously and value their contributions. And I failed to do that. And there have been other examples over the years where somebody sent an email and I didn't respond promptly, or I made a commitment to look into something, and either life got away from me and I didn't look into it, or life got away from me and I looked into it and didn't get back to them with what the outcome was. And again, we're busy, but following through on our commitments it's something that's hugely important, and that I continue to learn from my missteps in those realms. Somebody just gave me a notebook as a gift with the quote, "Commitment is what transforms a promise into reality," from Abraham Lincoln. And I was like, you know what? This is more a musser schmooze for me than it is a quote I live by. I try, but we have to honor our commitments, and I think that's been a lesson I've learned the hard way more than once.
Listen, I've made the same mistake. You know, we've all been there. I think if you asked a room of 100 NCSY professionals, have you done this before where you've had people cancel and then you forgot to tell the host, or any variation of that? I could virtually tell you 80 to 90% of us have made the same mistake at some point. So at least I feel good. I'm in good company. It's not just me.
Exactly.
But you're right. We learn from it. We're human. And, you know, there's a human element to this that runs all the way through. And part of it is that occasionally we mess up. And you're right. It's learning to follow through. It's learning to get better next time. And that's really all of life. You know, we talk about the follow through. You talk about our commitment, and as you said, it's the commitment to people. It's the commitment to the teens that we deal with, to their families. And one of the things over the past year I've been really proud of has been our commitment in the wake of October 7th to the teens that we deal with in high schools and on college campuses, to their families, to the people in Eretz Yisrael, to the soldiers. NCSY has really, I think, been a beacon in the Jewish community in terms of stepping forward and showing that we are committed to everybody, and no matter what the situation, we are steadfast in that. And it's been challenging. Anti-Semitism has reached alarming levels in high schools and on college campuses. If there was one single thing that you could say to an NCSY public school teen who's graduating now, who's seeing their fare of anti-Israel rhetoric and anti-Semitism in high school, and now they're going into the boiling point of anti-Semitism now on the college campuses, what would be something that you could tell a graduating NCSYer to empower them as they take that next step forward?
Great question. First thing is that they could probably tell me more than I could tell them, because the experience as a high school kid today is very different than the experience as a high school kid when I was in high school. And in many cases, they've already experienced a taste of what the college campus is going to be like in their own high school hallways and high school classrooms. The America I grew up in was an America where anti-Semitism felt like it was a fringe of a fringe of a fringe, and Jews were not made to feel unwelcome. But that's begun to change, and Jews are feeling less welcome, less entitled to embrace their Judaism with pride, and that's lamentable on so many levels. But it's the real life experience of today's high school kid. So they already know what college will be like to an extent from their high school experiences, I think. But what I would say is the best antidote to anti-Semitism is pro-Semitism. The best approach to be able to respond to whatever threats and whatever alienation you might be feeling is to understand who you are as a Jew, to learn more, and to be able to embrace that with pride. And it's harder to do that today. 30 years ago, nobody was protesting outside of Hillel houses and saying that the Friday night dinner that they have in the Hillel house is complicit in genocide, or absurd allegations like that. And so it makes it harder, but it makes it more necessary. It means that okay, but that Friday night dinner at Hillel or Chabad or JLIC is going to is going to help you understand who you are as a Jew, and that's the best answer to whatever alienation or isolation you might feel on a college campus, is to lean in more to community, lean in more to meaning, lean in more to tradition in ways that will help you feel emboldened to say, oh, I actually do know enough to understand what my Judaism means to me. I do know enough to respond to questions if challenged. I do understand that this is a rich, meaningful, powerful tradition, not an oppressive, all the epithets that are hurled against us are they're insanely baseless. But the only way to really know that is for a teen, for a graduate, to lean into those things that can provide meaning and connection.
Absolutely. It's been a very challenging time. And like you said, the best antidote to anti-Semitism is pro-Semitism. I love it. It's very needed. And I think that where we as an organization are kind of uniquely situated is that, part of our core is, as you've said, is teaching Torah, is inspiring Judaism, is getting these kids excited and passionate and engaged in their Judaism. And that is really the antidote. Like we said, it has been a very challenging time. There have been many challenging times in the past. Do you remember a certain time where something sticks out as, it may have been the biggest challenge you faced in your career, it may have, or just a big challenge that stuck out as something that was very difficult, but that you overcame, that you somehow powered through it or came up with a creative solution? Is there a challenge that sticks out in your mind, that's, if not at the top of the mountain, that's near the top of the mountain that you were able to overcome?
I do think that the prior Gaza war in 2014 was such a situation. That war broke out in the summer. So we had some of our programs already in Israel. Some of our programs hadn't yet left to Israel. And trying to navigate at the very last minute, what do we do with our programs that are on the ground in Israel? We ended up keeping them there, but moving them up north to Chispin by the Kinneret, and that was one set of decisions. We ended up sending my trusted associate international director Kivi Fried to the combat zone, and he was on the ground trying to make sure that those programs were educationally, operationally, safety-wise looked after. And we ended up deciding with our TJJ program to not send them to Israel, and instead, because they hadn't left yet, instead we ran a much shorter TJJ West Coast alternative, and they didn't go to Israel. That they went to West Coast, and not everybody went. Obviously, some people were Israel or bust.
I remember.
Yeah, and so it was just a reminder. Certainly, COVID had other reminders of we have to be nimble, agile, and a bit and capable of adjusting, because we can be thrown curveballs at any time, and we have to be able to roll with those punches.
Yes, that is absolutely true.
Metaphors, curveballs, punches, but yeah.
Sometimes you have to roll with the curveballs. It's okay.
Right.
But I remember it. I remember exactly what you're talking about. I remember sitting in the New York office and just trying to figure out, where are we going with this? What is happening? And I will tell you that I was in awe of you and of Kivi and just watching you guys, David Cutler, how you navigated that situation. It was impossible. There was no good moves forward, and you all handled it really expertly, and the communication was phenomenal. I mean, I remember very clearly being up very late, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, and we had conference calls and messages going back and forth, and this was a round-the-clock effort. I mean, if I look back on my career, those moments were some of, I think, the scariest, but also there was really a sense of, okay, we're all in this together. We're going to figure this out together. And there was something really magical about that. Obviously, it was a horrible, horrible time and experience for the Jewish people, but that we were able to, as a a team, almost as a family, move forward together through it there was something inspiring about it.
Appreciate that. Yeah, the expression is what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And
Yeah.
I think my predecessor, Rabbi Steve Berg, once said, but they forget to emphasize it almost killed you. And that's I think it's applicable to a lot of situations where I would not wish to repeat those situations.
Right.
They did make us stronger, and still I would not want to repeat those situations. So
Yeah.
we pray for, every Shemona Esrei, we pray for peace, we pray for smooth sailing, we pray for times that don't have adversity. And yes, we recognize that it's actually adversity that makes us stronger.
Yeah.
So how do we reconcile that? Well, I think we need both in our lives, and Hashem is responsible for the balance. We need calm, or we would be on adrenaline overload and would not make it. But we also know that those times of adversity, as long as they're spaced properly, they actually do strengthen us as people. Absolutely. And as professionals and as an organization.
Definitely. Rabbi Greenland, you've been so generous with your time. I got one more question for you. Thank you again. Moving forward with NCSY, how do you envision our organizational growth over the next decade? And is there a new area or focus that you'd really like to see NCSY engage with?
Such a great question, and I have big eyes. I have a big appetite. As
All
I
right,
talked about
let's bring
earlier,
it.
There's more we have to do. Josh Joseph, my boss at the OU, talks a lot about the denominator, and what he means is, what's the available market? Who are we trying to reach and impact? And recognizing that we're currently reaching 35,000 plus Jewish teens in North America, and another few thousand in other countries around the world. But in North America alone, there's nearly 300,000 Jewish teens. So 35,000 out of 300,000 is on one hand an impressive number. On the other hand, it just tells us the magnitude of what is the opportunity out there, because every teen needs more meaning in their life. Every teen needs more connection in their life. Every teen needs more Jewish tradition, and especially those who are on the fringes of even basic Jewish literacy, that they don't know, an aleph from a beis or Shabbos from any other day of the week. And so that is what drives the need to do more. So what are the opportunities? I mean, I think the biggest opportunities in terms of audiences are, I talked earlier about utilizing technology and reaching teens through their devices, which is where they're spending their time. We need to be doing more in that realm that can be a hook to tens of thousands of more teens. That's one. Two is, since last October 7th, there's been an incredible surge of interest in the public school space. We had 300 JSU clubs, Jewish Student Union clubs, prior to October 7th last year, that were operational live in person with an NCSY staff person. Since last October 7th, we've had requests for almost 300 more, which is mind-boggling. Wild. We've opened in-person live with a staff person, almost 100 of those. We've opened in-person with a teen leader who we're supporting via online education, that we're doing Zoom classes with the student leaders, something that we're calling JSU Global Campus, that we're teaching our curriculum to a teen leader in Boise, Idaho, or Tulsa, Oklahoma, and other remote locations where we're not putting a full-time staff person, but they are then empowered to teach their peers, and they're part of an online and real-world community of NCSY staff and fellow like-minded NCSY peers. That's an area that we've seen a surge in, and I think it's another additional opportunity. And in the day school world, we need to. There's so many day school kids who they're better educated knowledge-wise, but still lacking the meaning and the inspiration and the passion. And we've made a huge impact on them already through the summer sphere, 2 months a year. But what's happening the other 10 months a year? And what more can we do for them in summer? Are two big opportunities. So the audiences, I think, we've done a lot for the co-ed audiences in the day school space outside of the major Jewish metro population centers. So places like Cleveland and Columbus and Richmond, Virginia, and Philadelphia and Dallas and Houston. NCSY plays a critical role to those kids 12 months a year, summer and the other 10 months. But there's many communities, and they happen to be the bigger population centers where there's more we could do in the 10 months a year, and more that we can do in summer. So those are I think, broadly speaking, the audiences, and they all need us. So looking forward to seeing how we can drive further growth and expansion, hopefully still maintaining individual relationships and attracting the funders who are going to be able to make all that possible. We're so appreciative to the OU that has increased their funding almost uninterrupted every single year since I've been working for the OU, 23 years. But at the same time, the pace of growth at which we need to meet the communal need is only really going to come from fundraising growth. So very appreciative to those philanthropists who understand what we're trying to build and become our partners.
All right. Very well said. And you actually wrapped it up very nicely. So thank you so much. This has been really, for me, so much fun to talk to you and learn a little bit more about your history. And it really is an honor, again, for me to have this relationship with you going as far back as we do. And I'm excited. Just everything that you've now said is getting me all kind of riled up. I'm ready to go. So thank you for
great time to be working for NCSY.
It really is. And thank you so much again for joining us, Rabbi Greenland. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to NCSY Pulse. Just a reminder, you can find us on Instagram at NCSY Pulse. You can find us on YouTube at NCSY Pulse. Catch all of our conversations and interviews, and we will talk to you soon. Happy Hanukkah, everybody.